do we help then people move to that type of reality where it's being worked out on the ground, and it's not just about numericals and not numeric numbers, getting people in the stands, but it's really representation of the community that you live in, where we're working this out and all of its complexities show the reality of Christ's saving knowledge. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I know one question.
Yeah.
Sorry to overload you with that.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
one question. Just listen to the last
yeah.
10 seconds.
Yeah. Let me address the first
Sure.
part of saying, where have I seen it work out well? And this is actually something I think I include in the chapter, that the most beautiful place I've seen this work out is on the mission field, when I got to teach a church planting class to sort of under the radar Bible school that had people who were students coming from a Christian background, some of whom were coming from like the Coptic church, but who had uh, seen the gospel for what it is and were true born again believers. And then others were coming from Protestant backgrounds where they were raised in the church and had a grasp of the gospel and were not the majority Christian population, but were part of a minority Christian population. And then there was also a contingent of former Muslims who had come to faith. And in a place like Egypt, where for 1400 years the Christian population has been oppressed and persecuted by the Muslim majority, and every church that you talk to has some sort of a story that they can retell of some Muslim who professed false faith, integrated into the church, and then caused disruption or caused further persecution for them. There's great historical reasons for distrust, animosity, and a sense of wanting to keep as much distance as possible. And yet in that room, you had people who, some of whom were even connected to government officials, who could have been responsible for some of the policies that were discriminating or bringing persecution to the families of the people who were from the Christian background. But they were sitting together under scripture, considering what would it look like for us to plant churches here in a biblically faithful sort of way together. And for me, that stood in wild contrast to some of what we had been trained in, that was following homogeneous unit principle policies of saying, look, you're just going to slow things down if you try to create a church where you're bringing together former Muslims and former Copts and former Protestant in name only believers into the same place. If you try to do that, you're bringing in so much baggage, it's just going to move so slowly. Just start a Muslim background church and let that be isolated from the Christian background church. And then maybe sometime in the future, they can figure out how to mend those fences. But right now, speed is the most important thing. And from my vantage point, to sit in that room and see the beauty of the gospel reconciling persecutor and persecuted under a common mission to say, let's lift the name of Christ high in this place, even if it's going to be costly, even if it's going to be risky, because it's the church that is going to prevail against the gates of hell, and that church knows no demographic distinctions. That was, to me, such a compelling and beautiful picture of how this could be. But it wasn't something that happened at this high level of, figuring out how do we nationally make Christians and Muslims get along better. It wasn't policies at a governmental level that were the first port of call for this group, but rather it was the relationships of the person in front of them, that they had to work through some stuff. They had to work through some distrust, but they did so under scripture and in conversation. And so to your second part of your question, how do we do that? I think it really does start not with discussing some of the big hot button issues, whether it's critical race theory type things that are everybody's hot and bothered over, how to deal with that, and whether to see it as a tool to be used or whether to reject it out of hand because of Marxist underpinnings. Like, don't deal on these philosophical levels, deal on the relational levels. Invite somebody at church this Sunday over that lives in another part of town, somebody who doesn't look like you. Invite yourself to their house and just try to start making sure that there is an intentionality to getting to know the people that you don't naturally gravitate towards within the church, because that sort of a fabric relationally is going to sustain some change on a more broad level, but it's also going to manifest more beautifully the fact that it really is only the gospel that can solve some of these problems that society is seeing, and that we would confirm, yeah, that's broken. That's a consequence of sin, but there's an answer.